Okay, so this is the panel about freelancing and moving from academia to industry. I'm really happy to have here on the stage with me Cyr, Catherine, Teresa, and my friend Matteo. So I would like to take like 1 or 2 minutes to give the opportunity to each one of you to introduce yourself, and we can start from Cyr.
Hi everyone, my name is Cyr. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Königsweg. We have a based in Mannheim data science company. I personally founded my first startup out of university 11 years ago. And after 6 years of running the business, we ultimately did an exit. And then based on this, we incorporated new companies. And 4 years ago, together with Alexander Hendorf, who I guess everyone knows here, we together founded Königsweg. And I would like to share some thoughts and some experiences that I made by myself and that I also nowadays understand within our industry and our interaction with businesses.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Katharina. I'm a computer scientist. I started my career more as a software engineering, mostly in research settings. I did a PhD in computer science, and during that I got started with machine learning. And after I finished that, like roughly 5-ish, 6-ish years ago, I went into industry as a data scientist, and I became freelance about 2.5 years ago.
Yeah. Hi. So I'm Teresa. I also studied computer science a long time ago. Then I randomly did a PhD in computer science. So basically randomly because I just went for doing Diplomarbeit in Germany and then I stayed because it was like there. So at the time I did the PhD, I did it in information retrieval, then that became kind of data science these days. And I switched to industry in 2011. And I've been working in industry ever since, in data science, data engineering, and back in data science.
Hi, I'm Matteo. I'm a freelance data scientist here in Berlin. So I've studied physics. I've been in academia for a while. I did a PhD and then a few years of research. And then switched to data science and freelancing 3 years ago. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, cool. Maybe we can start from Katharina. Can you tell us something about your experience of moving from academia to industry? Because you moved to an employee role before, and then you switched to freelancing. So I would like to know more about, what was the reason behind this change, and how do you end up in industry?
Well, I guess the people here who have an experience in academia know how it's quite a narrow path. Like a lot of people are PhDs, do a PhD, fewer do a postdoc, and even fewer get even further. So I was actually scared that if I don't do the switch now, I might get deeper into an academic role, and at some point there would be a stop, and it would be too late to make a switch. I don't know if that fear is actually like realistic, but it is fear I had at the time. So it was very much driven by this, and also by like academia does put the focus somewhere else. Like I enjoyed my work in academia, but it's not like about putting things into production, to see something that you build go live and see other people use it. And I really was driven also to experience that.
Okay, thank you. What about you, Teresa?
So when I did my PhD, we did a lot of work on European Union projects, and the first European Union project was really fun. And then the second European Union project was, again, money changes hands and then everybody forgets about it. And then the third European project was the same. Money changes hands and then everybody forgets, even the industry partners that they say, yeah, we're going to use this. So, and then staying on for a postdoc, I would have had to write proposals. So that was like a little bit like I didn't feel very motivated for that. So I think I kind of left academia for a lack of motivation coming out of the whole process. I went to industry where things are better on one side, but like actually worse on another side. So I wouldn't like even say one is better than the other. So I thought that I go to industry and then you have like all the stuff goes live and it's really cool. But actually, I went to industry and I said like, wow, guys, you're doing this, but this is really wrong. How can you do? And nobody wants to hear that they are wrong. So it was more like, no, we just want something simple that goes live. So it was like, yeah, okay, so I have a really nice degree, but nobody cares. So, yeah, but the more you grow in the role and then you realize how to talk to people and how to engage and how to get your stuff across, then things start to change. But I think like at the very beginning, it was a very like interesting transition time.
Okay, thank you.
This is contaminated.
You can use this one.
Okay, thank you. So my life in academia, I think I was very lucky because I had great support. I worked with great people, and I came to Germany with the fellowship that I won. So I couldn't really complain. But the problem for me was the kind of work that you do in academia. At some point, especially when you start after your PhD, you have to own your research and really push in a certain direction. It kind of narrows, and also sometimes it's not very social. It can be very lonely. It's a very long-term way of looking at things, which for me was not very satisfying. So you don't get a reward very easily, and I needed to do something more practical in that sense. So at some point, I understood I couldn't do that, and I needed to get into the private sector. Yeah.
Cool, thank you. I have a question for us here. Have you tried to connect directly to academia and try to bring, talents directly to your company for digital transformation, maybe?
Yes, definitely. But I would like to add one more sentence, obviously, due to reasons I missed about my personal or my academical background, because I think this is quite important for this audience that, as far as I understand, I'm the only one who's not a data scientist by default. Okay, so at least we are two. No, just to give you a perspective, I studied political science, geography, and geoinformatics. And so, in generally speaking, I had the same. I can understand what you just described from the academical perspective. I was also lucky that back then my professor really supported me by the idea of becoming an entrepreneur directly, and so basically I had the opportunity to create the first company directly out of my master thesis in 2008 at the University of Heidelberg, and what I can only. We discussed it, not give as advice, but rather than a tip, because I had some kind of discussions during the last days. Everyone who thinks about, shall I somehow, somewhat get into the freelancing, get into the self-employment, get into the entrepreneurship, and think about timing, I think there's no rule for doing it on a specific way. Just do it. Just try it. Maybe back then I was a little bit naive, which was like positive back then. And nowadays, if you are in a situation that you're up to a certain point, there are different drivers. For instance, as in your case, you talked about like some kind of fear, which I can totally understand up to a certain situation, because or at least I can emphasize, I didn't experience it by myself because I've never been in the situation. But coming to your question about the transition and also the interaction that we have with people now who are studying in university and we interact with and we talk, I have always the situation that Ingo and me, like my co-fellow, he always asks about not to get in the wrong direction, the big five for life, he always says, like the achievements that you want to realize in life. And so basically when you're a data scientist and you're into computer science and you have all these opportunities, technical-wise and job-wise, you could rather think about what you would like to do and what you would like to achieve. And chances are quite good that under any circumstances you have the ability to fill your fridge, right? Like it's not this situation that you should be afraid of. How could I survive? So based on this, my advice is always, or my tip, try it, do it. And this is also how we approach students or like male, female from university who come into our corporation.
Okay, so you're saying that there are so many opportunities, especially for data scientists right now. that it makes sense to,
Like, definitely.
challenge the market and
I like whether I call it data X, whether you're a data scientist, data engineer, data analyst. So basically, to be honest, not coming from the Berlin situation, I would rather discuss about can tell about the situation down south. So there are job opportunities everywhere, whether it's in corporates, whether it's in startups, whether you can create or fund your own or found your own company. So I think here there are no limitations. It depends on your individual motivation, whether you have internal, intrinsic motivation, or you have this external situation where everyone talks about becoming an entrepreneur and this work-life balance situation. So it's an individual decision that everyone needs to think about itself. But if you want, for instance, have this kind of freedom or also this kind of self-determination, I think you should try and go for it.
So it's like the right time. Okay. I have a question for Katerina. So how did you manage your switching from academia to industry? What was the process in your case?
I applied for jobs.
That easy.
So I did my PhD in Stockholm, and I knew I wanted to move to Berlin. I knew some people here, but I didn't have a network in the sense that people would refer me to a job. I think if you come from computer science into data science, it's somewhat a privilege because people maybe wrongly believe that people who have studied computer science are stronger on all kind of programming tasks and so on than people who come maybe from physics or biology and so on. I think this is somewhat a mistaken belief because in academia, the programming that you do is really, really different and has very different goals than the program you do in industry. So I applied for a few jobs, and I was very lucky that for basically all of them I got interviews, and then I took one of them. Even so, I think it's somewhat uncommon to be able to as quickly as that to move from academia to industry.
Was that easy also for you, Teresa?
Yeah, so I originally applied for Google, and I had all these interviews in München. I didn't really like the projects, but they said I can do an internship, and then they said that some things have changed and you cannot do an internship anymore. But apply in 1 year. Like, okay. So then I applied actually for one job. So I had a boyfriend in Hanover, and I thought I don't want to move too far away. Maybe he comes, and then he didn't come anyway, so I moved to Hamburg. So, so I applied at Xing, and then they had recommender systems, and then I did my PhD in recommender systems, and then I just got in. And then Google wrote oh, we didn't realize you are applying for München. Can you come to Zurich? Just come visit our office. You don't need to do the interviews. No, sorry, no. So yeah, it was 2011. It was I actually applied for a senior Perl developer job in the data content team. They didn't have any other data related jobs. And, so in the interview I was Perl has classes? Oh, I didn't know that. Anyways, so they hired me because I knew the business domain actually already. So.
Did you have to deal in any way with imposter syndrome? Switching from academia to industry, I'm not ready or I don't have the skills?
Not at the time, so I'm actually not. So as I said, my PhD was really relevant to the new domain I got into, and the coding that I did during the PhD. So I did really good teamwork during my PhD. So I had one Italian colleague, and he really liked to write papers, and I really liked to code. So we wrote a lot of papers together. And so this his code was really bad. So I couldn't So it actually helped that I did a lot of coding during the PhD, and I was a little bit more pragmatic already back then than traditional what people expect from people in academia these days.
And for you, Katarina, did you have the same did you have to go through imposter syndrome during your move from academia to industry?
No, not really. I think it was also, like Teresa said, it was 2013. It was also all pretty new. There wasn't really a process yet, like on how to interview a data scientist, for example. So I kind of got in maybe before it got complicated. Or maybe it's not yet. I don't know.
I had to do select out of a database. It's like, seriously? Is this a trick question?
I had to explain the difference between an inner or an outer join.
That's a good question. And what about you, Matteo? Because you have a really interesting experience, no? Switching directly from academia to freelancing, no?
Yeah, so actually, maybe I can say something related first to what Sir said about, when to do things or if it's the right time. The thing is, when you're in academia, you're kind of in a bubble. For example, speaking about imposter syndrome, I don't think I had that, but when you're in academia, you think like, I cannot do anything else. It's not like you're imposter. It's not imposter syndrome, but you just think that there's nothing else you can do because you don't know anything better. You don't know anything better. So it took me a while to kind of break out of the shell and understand what was going on in data science, machine learning, and all this stuff. So, for example, going to meetups. So I think that's one difficulty in that sense. Otherwise, in terms of, do I have the skills, et cetera, I think I knew I did not have the skills, so I had to learn them. But I knew I could learn them. Basically, I think if you do a PhD, you know how to learn. You learn how to learn, basically. So that was not a problem. It was just a matter of time, I guess. Speaking of going into freelancing from academia, actually, when I decided to quit, I didn't really think about freelancing. It really never crossed my mind. I didn't even think I could do it. And then, right after I quit, I did this program with a company in London. Actually, it's one of the sponsors, Pivigo. It's called S2DS. It's targeted to academics that want to get into data science. And you basically do a 5-week project with a company. It's consulting while being mentored. And so after that, I started looking for jobs. Like my plan was to get a job in a company somewhere. At the same time, they have a platform for freelancers. They scope projects and they hire people to work on those projects. And I said to myself, I can do this to get some experience because, when you have interviews, you don't have any experience. It's kind of harder. And so while I was trying to find a job, I was doing freelance projects. And after the last interview, where the company really didn't know what data science was or what to do with data scientists, it was basically only reporting. I said to myself, well, maybe I can just try to be a freelancer. Since I was really enjoying freelancing, that's something I discovered while doing it. It was basically by chance.
I guess a great experience so far. Being a freelancer. Okay. Yeah. Cool. And what about you, Katarina? Because then you became an employee and then you decided to switch to freelancing. Was that like a natural process, or you wanted to have more freedom, or more independence?
Well, the complete honesty is I got a job because I needed a flat. I needed a place to live here in Berlin.
Okay, that makes sense.
I think I always saw it as somewhat short-lived, that job, because I think the freelancing where it speaks to me is kind of like the refusal to commit. A full-time job is quite a commitment. It's not one I'm really happy to make. And also, I consider myself like a generalist. I like to work on many, many different things. And it is much easier, of course, You're not within a fixed role at some company, but rather you can select your clients. Like, I feel like doing something more researchy now. I feel like doing some front-end things now. I feel like doing some like database stuff now. I did have like I do see some drawbacks in freelancing. Like, you mentioned, for example, that you were like very lucky in academia with your team. I think most PhD students aren't. I was completely alone. And it's like spending 5 years on your project on your own teaches you a lot of things. It's not necessarily fun. So coming into industry and actually for the first time, like having a team around you, that was really like a really nice experience. And I knew I would miss that going into freelance. And I do miss that. And it's like the one big drawback that I see for myself.
Okay, cool. Thank you. I want to switch to another topic, like about the freelancing market. How does it work like here in Germany? If you have some experience about this here.
I apologize, I didn't.
Sure. About the freelance market here in Germany, especially in your case, I think in the south of Germany.
Okay, I got it. Okay, basically what we see with our clients is that when we approach them or when they approach us in specific projects, in most cases we don't have necessarily the resources or the people who have the capabilities to realize what the demands are directly with our internal staff. So we work a lot with freelancers. And in this situation, we discover many things that, in contrast, as I mentioned, maybe to Berlin, in the southern area, it is still a matter of that there's this language barrier, that many of the customers really more or less demand German language, which is a bummer, because then I don't know the accurate percentage, but I would say 95% maybe, or even more of potential freelancers fell out of the system, especially of the really talented in the European community. So what we managed over time is based on the situation that the customer at the end stuck. They now have this mind shift that they understand that it is necessary to open themselves also into this direction. And so we also started now since the beginning of this year to have the first projects where we also are bilingual. So, which means then obviously down the road that the opportunity for potential jobs in the southern part even increases dramatically.
What are like the main reasons to, rely on freelancers? Like, because you want to scale your company and it's just easier, or also, yes, to bring expertise inside?
To us, the main part is actually what you just said, that most of the, not all people shall become freelancers, but most of the freelancers are very, very talented people who are self-dependent based on this couple of years, as you just described, 4 or 5 years doing something on their own, and based on the professionalism, quite good at what they do, and then quite picky. So this is the situation from the freelance perspective. And the situation from our perspective, when we interact with our clients, it is I really enjoy the independence that I can discuss with a potential client problem XYZ, and not necessarily be in the situation that I need to somehow, somewhat sell him our internal resources, no matter whether they have the capabilities or not, but rather than bring really the a person, whether he or she who is an expert on this particular field, in a determined project of a couple of weeks or month, and somehow do the enablement process and then get out of it again. So this is a win-win from our perspective as a company, and then also for the freelancers. So this is basically a key and cornerstone of our business model.
Okay, cool. So now I have a really, really important question. So I work at Inform. I might be tired of my job and I want to switch to freelancing. What is the first thing that I should do?
Okay. What is the first thing you should do?
Start a meetup.
Yes. Well, maybe not start a meetup, but go to meetups for sure. Well, you gotta have, I think before you leave your job, you gotta kind of test the water and look for clients, understand what people are looking for. One important thing I think that I recently realized many people don't really have is financial management. So be sure that you have a buffer. I realized there's quite a lot of people, more than I assumed, that just have money in, money out, and no money in the bank at the end of the month, which to me is like crazy. But yeah, you have to have that under control. And let's say it depends on your experience, I guess, but if you don't have a lot of experience, you should at least have 6 months, 1 year of, like, you can not work and live off of it. That's my opinion. Maybe you can do it with less, but anyway. And then I would really recommend trying to start with the one online platform for freelancers. That's the easiest way you can get into the market. You can get experience. You're not going to get paid as much as when you're independent, but you're going to learn how it works. You're going to learn all the things you need to know. Yeah. So, and then when you want, you can just leave the platform and start with your own clients. So, yeah.
So increase your network through meetups, have a buffer, and try with online platform. Okay. Something else?
I never worked through a platform. Like I said, I had no network coming to Berlin, but I was rather deliberate about building one afterwards. And I would say it's not just going to meetups, it's also contributing in some way to community building, because just going to meetups, it's really hard to just get into a chat with interesting people. But if you're on the stage and you're giving a talk, then the people come to you afterwards. You don't have to come to them.
So sharing knowledge pays back.
Sharing knowledge or sharing your organizational skills, or just giving to the community so that the community sees that you are somebody that can be relied on, that has knowledge, that is interesting to work with.
Okay, cool. What about Hamburg? Do you work with freelancers? And if not, why?
I think our company doesn't really work with freelancers. My previous company did.
Xing?
Xing, yeah. But the opinions about that were split. So some were negative, like everything that freelancer does, then at the end when they leave, nobody can maintain style, like equals consultant style. I don't know. That's what people think. I didn't have to touch code written by freelancers at the time, so I wouldn't know. But I just wanted to say something that based on the discussion now, I realize why I am like really scared about the concept of going into freelancing, because first, financial buffer, no way. And, and secondly, I never, ever not worked in a team. So that's where my imposter syndrome kicks in. I'm not sure I would be able to go that deep into a topic where I cannot delegate some things that I don't like. Sorry. I mean, if you work in a team, there's always going to be somebody who likes to do the things you don't like to do. Maybe.
Yeah. So speaking about the team aspect, actually you can work in a team when you're freelancer, when you're freelancing. It just depends on the project and the situation, but I've worked in several teams in different projects, so that's still a possibility.
This is in fact also how most of my projects were. Not that I was in the end the lone wolf working on this thing and I'll come back after 3 months and here is it, but rather that I work day to day just as the employees of the company and contribute to the team. But it's still somewhat time limited, and it's still building maybe less familiarity with the people that you're working with.
Cool. So I decided I want to you want to say something? Okay.
Yeah. I like that we don't put freelancing in a perspective at this is the one thing and top-notch thing, and there are no disadvantages. Surely there are, and we heard a couple of them. That means that you have to have a specific mindset, obviously, that allows you to be very self-organized. For instance, I really appreciate what you said about the financial organization, buffer, taxes, private insurance, etc., all the stuff that comes with it. When we interact with freelancers, we have this systematic checks where we make sure that the freelancers that we interact at least have more than one or two projects or one or two companies that they collaborate for. Otherwise, in Germany, you have this, I don't know the English word, Scheinselbstständigkeit. That means that, in fact, you are a fake employee, and you need to make sure that for both parties that you don't run into this. So this is one situation that you always want to somehow make sure that being at the end calling freelancer, you're still an entrepreneur of your own brand. And that means to a certain amount you need to promote your skills. You need to do some marketing. And I like what you said about contributing to PyData, for instance, or to a meetup in general. Here the most important thing from my personal experience is continuity. So if you're on a continuously level there, you show up, you contribute, then your network starts, and then all of a sudden the potential projects come by recommendation. This is also like
so show up every day and show up every day and be consistent.
Be consistent.
Okay. So I decided to leave Inform and I want to approach a company just by random chances, Königsberg. With which mindset you think I should approach, like, I don't know, connecting to you, for example? Can you hear me?
No.
Okay.
Not so good. I apologize.
So I decided to leave Inform, for example, and I want to approach Königsberg. But I would like to have some tips about the mindset that I should have. Like, should I approach you with an employee mindset, or I should be like pitching my skills in a different way? If I want to build connection with you, if I want to work as a freelancer for you.
Any level, mail, telegram, show up personally. Here we have a talk during the conference, and so then it's a process. If we talk first time, second time, maybe 3 times, and then, for instance, you show up at one of the conferences that we host, contribute with the talk, or we also can do something in exchange. Like it's no one way. It's not a one-way approach that you need to somehow approach us and explain us that, hey, I want to be a freelancer. Can I do something for you? So it's like bilateral. We also have to permanently show what we do, how we do it, what kind of projects we have. There must be this fit. And this is like our personal cultural baseline that it is no asymmetric situation. It's like it needs to fit. And if it fits, then it's a win-win for both parties.
Okay, something as easy as, I'm working as an employee. I would like to switch to freelancing. I have these skills. Shall we connect, or maybe I can collaborate with a project? It's something fine?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, definitely. Please, everything open.
Great. Do you have something to add about like approaching companies, and how do you build your network of customers at the end?
Actually, not to that question, sorry, just to some things you said earlier. Just to take the worry away from people, what you said about needing to speak German is not something I've ever observed as a freelancer in Berlin.
Okay.
Yeah.
But definitely, this is a huge difference, which I want to point out. Like, that's Berlin. Berlin is like, with
Berlin
all
bubble.
the aspects, with the startup environment, with the potential to be on a cool data science startup and interact. This is not very typical for other parts in Germany.
Do you want to say something about building your network and approaching customers? Do you have some experience?
Like I said, everything so far to me has come through my network that I have built by giving talks at places like this and by organizing and all of these things.
Matteo?
Yeah, as I said, like initially I used an online platform, so that was very easy, really, because I didn't have to do anything to find projects. It's Pivigo. Yeah, they're one of the sponsors here, and then they came from different places. I mean, I got some projects from the Python Berlin Slack channel. We have a jobs sub channel where people write job ads and ask for help. Something from people I know on LinkedIn, not from recruiters. You should know recruiters are a very low success rate way of finding clients. So I expect they will work in the next 5 years probably, given like a 1% success rate or something. Then it's like the network. It's people I met, people that know me, and then know about upcoming projects. This kind of things.
Cool. So yeah, go to meetup, meet people. Okay. So I don't work at Infarm now, but I'm completing my PhD in computer science, and I'm tired of academia, and I want to switch to industry. I just need to apply to a job. That's the best thing. That will be like your tip, your advice.
Yes and no. So it depends what kind of job you're applying to. There are a few like research scientist, engineer positions where you might just get in just because you have a PhD in machine learning. I think there's a major shift in general when you come from academia to the industry, in that, like, for example, the communication side of things in academia is very undervalued. Nobody talks about soft skills, as they're called, and because it's just numbers. There's no doubt. Everything is crystal clear, and that results in like usually very bad, very inept people socially driving some projects, and some horror stories. But anyway, so you gotta understand that there's a different mindset when you're going into the industry. You have to communicate. You have to explain what you're doing in simple way, which some people from academia have a very hard time doing. Also, there is a tendency with some people from academia in thinking that, they have a PhD, they've done research, they know everything. So nobody can tell them what to do or how to do things or stuff like that. That's like the worst thing you could ever do. But unfortunately, there is a tendency to do that, because in academia it's just, there's no stress on communication soft skills, which was like a showstopper for me, and it's what I like more from the fact that I work in the private, because it's much more about communicating what you're doing. It's much more about understanding how your client thinks, what they want. It's about learning their language. The technical side of things is there, but I'm not going to say it's secondary, but it's not the only thing, and there's a lot of other things you have to do properly.
Can I say something?
Yes.
So I would say it depends. Depends on what role you want to have. So if you want to go for...
Can you add something also related to your experience now as a manager, right?
Yeah. So I would say, like, if it is impossible not to perceive somebody who just finished their PhD and this is the first job interview they have, not to perceive that person as a junior. So if they don't prepare, if they don't do their homework on like what is the industry they're applying to and how do they like compare to that and how do they apply, like it's just, you don't even have to solve business problems. It's just like do a little bit of research and like try to like fantasize solving business problems. Without this one little exercise, you are definitely going to be perceived as junior. And then if this perceived as junior level clashes with what you think of yourself, then you're going to be like having a lot of job interviews that are not going to be fruitful. So what I recommend to people when they say, yeah, we want to switch and whatever, I would say like, yeah, just go and apply somewhere where you don't want to work, just to have like an exercise of, you can't lose anything except a little bit of pride, but at least you know what you gotta face afterwards. And then start preparing before finishing with academia, if you don't have a financial buffer to afford not working for a while, you can already start preparing yourself for like what it would be to work in industry. And I guess that would mean maybe going to meetups, see how people present in meetups is completely different than how people present at an academic conference, where it's everything formulas and math. And if you miss 1 minute of the presentation, you don't even know what they're talking anymore about, right? Because there is no story sometimes, and it's like completely different. So I think, yeah. So if you say like, I'm this in academia and then I want to be this in industry, then you have to work for that. And
so prepare yourself and do your own work. Prepare yourself and do your own work.
Yes. I mean, that applies to anything, right? And
Katarina, do you have something to add about this?
No.
I would like to add one or two sentences like, obviously doing your homework, be prepared, and all these general aspects, and what you said about the soft skills, it really is a factor. But in general, I think it comes to the question, who am I and what do I want to do? When I did my master's, for me it was very clear that I don't want to stay in academia directly. For me, this was not a concept that I wouldn't. For me, it was clear that I don't want to become a researcher and neither a teacher. So this was clear. And in contrast to my sister, for instance, who is a researcher, so if I ask her what is her sweet spot, what is the place where she's very happy, and she tells me it's the library. Okay, so good for her. So she found her sweet spot. And to me, this was definitely clear that I don't want this. So this is, from my perspective, a very, very fundamental distinction, whether you even think about leaving academia or not. And if you want to leave academia and go into the industry, I like your approach to go somewhere and just try without people around you who already know. So you are the domain expert by default. But if you even don't go to such a place, try to understand that, especially in industry, with our clients, for instance, in the context of advanced manufacturing, smart production, or whatever you call it, digitalization of production. The data science, data engineering, ML part, this is the one thing, but you have to have domain expertise, and it does not come overnight. So it is okay to give yourself a certain time. And so based on this, it is, from my perspective, totally acceptable to have this concept of academia going to become an employee, and then after that, up to a certain point, then go into freelancing.
Okay, cool.
Actually, I would like to add, it's just, in my opinion, just as valid to have a hard time deciding. It's not as obvious for everyone. I had a hard time deciding, and I still do. I see a lot of positives with many things, and I do projects that are more researchy. I still do teaching, and I do some very, very applied software engineering type projects. And you can find that role for yourself if that is something you enjoy.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree a lot with you. And also, regarding what you said, I think it's, you were very lucky to have that kind of clarity within yourself, to know that you didn't want to go into academia. Because, when I think about myself, I realized at some point I couldn't do that. And it was a very hard time, because I was like in my third year of postdoc already. I was on a track, basically. So I was kind of late. And sometimes I think if I could have that clarity before I started my PhD, maybe I would have done a different thing. So it's not obvious, really. It's, so I think you were quite lucky in that, yeah.
The famous postdoc lottery. So we have like 15 something minutes. So I would like to take questions from the audience. I will just walk around, raise your hand if you have questions. Okay, start from here.
Hello. Yeah, maybe my question is for the freelancers. Specifically, when you set up a contract with an employer, I think a lot of the success for freelancing depends on getting the things that you need to be successful. So, for example, like clear project guidelines, but also ways of working. How do you go about setting this up in particular when you first start freelancing? Because I think it's when you have some exposure already, you have a reputation, you maybe have more leverage to do this, but when you're first starting out, to get these sort of things are more difficult, but I think equally critical.
So I think this goes back to what I said before about starting with the platform, because in that case as well, you don't really have to worry too much about. I mean, the outcome is set. The contracts are set by the intermediary company, basically. So and they're usually well thought out. So there's a model. They have a model that usually works for freelancers. So if you start with that, it's easier. And then you can see what they do, and then you can replicate it basically for yourself. Does that answer your question? Yeah. But otherwise, it was about like how do you set the outcome, right, of the project.
What ways of working tools you want to use, ensuring that when you're with tools that you're going to use, ways of working, ensuring that when you start the job, maybe there isn't a 180, for example, that things are changed on the fly, because it often happens even for positions, right? For a regular job, you can go and they can say one thing and then you get in and it's something totally different. So to ensure this in the contract setup such that this doesn't occur, so you can be maximally effective when you start, I think is important. I would like to ensure that.
Yeah, I think in my experience, I was never too specific in the contracts. Usually it's basically renting my time for a generic scope, not too generic, but still quite generic. And the only outcome that you can define beforehand is insights or developing a certain part of the software, for example. But it's really hard to be very specific when you're doing data science because you don't know what you're going to get exactly. It's partly still R&D. So you can say, yeah, we're going to work on this aspect of the project. We're going to use this data, and the goal is this, but the outcome, it cannot be the goal because you don't know what's in between. There are uncertainties. So you can guarantee you'll be there, you're going to work on that for a certain amount of time. So you set a time box, basically. You set a time box and a scope, and certain things that you can guarantee.
So generally speaking, you're just billing your hours and you just keep track of them.
Yeah.
And then you send the invoice to the customer.
But then if there is a change, if the company decides that they don't need your project anymore, it's...
Yeah, better to kill it.
That's just what's going to happen. You cannot say, oh, but we signed the contract, and that can happen, actually.
Katharina?
Yes, similar, that I've mostly just bill by the hour, and then quite often it's that every 2 weeks or every month somebody higher up signs up on the things that I did. To see that, to verify that was indeed within the scope of what we had defined. I also want to add one thing, and that is, while I, up to now, have always kind of worked with the standard contract given to me by the employer, I have at least one freelancer colleague that now swears by having their own contract and having a lawyer at hand to really go through and make sure that the contract you're signing is also on your side and not just on the employer's side. Not something I've personally gone through with, but think it's probably a thing I should start doing.
Okay, we have another question here.
So I have two questions. The first one is, if I do a PhD, it's like a 4 to 5 year job. So if I'm going to industry or freelancing after that, how would I convince my client or employer that I'm ready for a senior position? Because I don't think anybody would like to join as a junior engineer after a PhD. And my second question is, if I want to go to freelancing, how would I make my portfolio before going into freelancing? Like, is it open source projects or something else?
So I think to the first question, if you have the luxury to be able to do an internship in industry during your PhD, that's actually really valuable. So, I mean, all of the bigger companies are looking for interns. So I did an internship at Microsoft, and that was a lot of fun. And you basically show that you worked through your PhD, and people in industry can quantify that better than if they never were at your university and they have no idea about what you studied.
I think, I mean, senior roles for people just coming directly out of a PhD are probably limited to very researchy, industrial researchy type positions. Otherwise, you really, like through internships or other means, need to first prove that you like have the business understanding to deliver the results necessary for the company. The portfolio question. Well, I am shitty with managing any kind of social media. I don't have a website. I have a domain that only forwards to my GitHub, which has like a repository with my presentation slides. So there's not much of a portfolio for me, to be honest. For me, it's really knowing people and being known as somebody who delivers work.
Sir, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, so for the portfolio, I mean, you can contribute to open source. I'm trying, like, I set up my website this year, finally, trying to set up some personal projects, but that's kind of a problem because, you know, you work on a lot of stuff, but then it's mostly private, so you cannot show it. The only thing you can kind of show, it's like your GitHub activity, because it shows even for private repos, but yeah. So, I mean, you can, you know, you can work on personal projects. That's something you can do. But again, in my experience, it wasn't crucial.
Yeah. I would like to add two small things. The one is, what I tried to mention when you start to become a freelancer, if you have this mindset of this entrepreneurial aspect that you have to manage your financials and also your marketing or understand to promote yourself a little bit, I think a basic website, for instance, or a basic overview about your skill set, like not very, very shiny and fancy and super over-engineered, but at least the basis, it is just a must-have. So this is what I could recommend to anyone, that at least put some efforts into these basic aspects of thinking that yourself and your skills as a brand, and at least show to the potential world who is interested to have at least an idea who you are and which fields you have some qualifications and specialties. And to your question about like the framework, the legal framework, and also the operational framework, I totally can only underline what you just described about this having the own freelancing contract, or having at least an idea from the legal perspective what it means and what it doesn't mean. In our case, the reality is that we always argue and interact with our clients and their procurement policies. So to be very honest, at the end, the deal that we interact with our customers is always then the frame for the interaction with the freelancers that we interact, obviously. So it determines based on this. Time and material, or at least time-based interaction, is a very common situation that we use. We have this onboarding process where we deliver the access to the tooling and make sure that on a specific quality level, at least you, be a freelancer, have the opportunity to deliver in time and quality. And then we have this dailies, or at least once a week, these checks, because it is something that we at the end need to deliver to the customer. So very open and transparent process.
I have one little thing to add. Besides internships, there's the other thing you could do is volunteering. So if you were yesterday at the Data Science for Good talks, in Berlin they have the hackathons, so hackathons in the city in general, but in this you actually have the opportunity to work in a team, because this is a lot of things industry is afraid when they hire PhDs, is that they don't know how to work in a team. So when you are exposed to working in a team and then you maybe realize you don't like it or something.
To add to that, I'm in the organizing team of Data Science for Social Good Berlin, so if that interests you, talk to me afterwards.
Cool. So I will take the last two questions. Okay.
Yeah, actually, I have also a question to the audience, because just out of interest, like, who of you is interested in general in freelancing, or does freelance already, or who of you, maybe you can ask this question, like, this is really interesting for us to have an understanding of whether what we just discussed is totally understandable for you or new, or just
who wants to be
boring.
a freelancer? Ah, okay.
I didn't expect that.
Who wants to switch from academia to industry? Okay.
Yeah, I have two questions. The first is relevant to both freelancers as well as those who want to move from academia to industry. So how do you manage expectations from a potential employer, especially in data science? Because, neural networks versus simple regression, for example. And that's the first. And the second is PyTorch, Theano, TensorFlow, Docker, Kubernetes, Kibana, Elasticsearch, tool fatigue. How do you manage that?
I didn't get the second question.
So you need to be like an expert of everything, I guess. That's... Yes.
So when I hire data scientists, I tell them at the beginning that we do not do deep learning. They can decide if that doesn't fit their agenda. I mean, so...
Apply to work there.
I mean, not this year, not next year probably either, so yeah. Just being honest, so...
If you have learned a few tools, you can learn any tool. Just don't be afraid. Do the tutorial, see what it's about, what is behind the buzz, what is behind like the marketing. Just see, it probably boils down to something very simple. Get the essence of the thing, learn the tool. Pretend you know it, learn it before the job.
Yeah, during the series of freelancing, you learn on the job.
And also, I would say it's really unfair if hiring managers are like asking point-wise like about specific tools. That means that they're really bad hiring managers. So that would be like a red flag for you. Like if they would expect you to know all the tools that are out there and then like judge you on this one, and you have like a buzzword interview, then it's a little bit off.
Completely agree with that.
So you're not looking for a full stack data scientist?
Mega full stack.
Mega full stack. Okay, we have the last question here.
So imagine that I'm moving from academia. My first job, I wanna do freelancing. So how do I choose my hourly rate so it's adequate? So.
Well, in the beginning, you don't choose. They propose it to you and you say yes. Then you learn that it's too low and then you start increasing it. So, and also you ask around what people charge. And so if you want to know my rate, my last few projects, I was charging 700 euros per day. But there are people who charge more, who charge less. It depends on the project, on the length of the project. From what I hear, it's anything between, on average, between 500 and 700 per day.
I really appreciate your honesty.
To add to that, now you know the market rate. That doesn't mean you're going to get that in your first job, and maybe you need to swallow the pride of feeling underpaid at the beginning, but then just to get started, to know you can get a freelancing job, you can do this, you can deliver, and then quickly try to get to market rate.
And I would say this applies to any job, the first job. Like when I switched from academia, and in industry in Germany, everybody wins. Like you work 1 year, you work 3 years, everybody has the same salary. And I didn't know that I have to negotiate, so they said a number, and I was like, yeah. And then everybody was like, did you negotiate? Yeah. So yeah.
Exactly. Like the first, like for me, the first projects where I was learning so much, the amount of stuff I was learning while I was doing the job was incredible. I was paid to learn, basically. So, I mean, I think my first project was, £250 per day. So it was a lot less than what it is now, but I didn't care because I just found a new job that was much better than the one I had before. I was super excited about everything. And I got paid to learn. So after a while you kind of normalize things, but at the beginning, it's fine.
Yeah, I would also agree that this is a typical rate. And why is this? Like, apart from situations where you have a real professionalism or real expert status on particular field in industry, you can charge obviously sometimes 1,500 euros, 1,800 euros, up to 2,500 euros per day. But on average, when you also think about corporate procurement and how they perceive this all and how they think, there's this magic budget of approximately 1,000 euro per day that they are willing to pay. And if you then, based on this, have the opportunity to interact directly with the client, super. But in most cases, you interact through an intermediate, whether it's a platform or, to be honest, whether it's like interaction through a company like us who has this access to customers and client, and then very openly and honest and transparent, if it's like 30 to 50% for sales, marketing, interaction with customer satisfaction, quality assurance, tooling, legal aspects, and so on and so on. This is pretty normal. So, which means that this 500 to 800 euros per day ratio is a very understandable and transparent if you think it's from that point of view. To your aspect of 250 euros a day, well, it really also gives you the situation being a freelancer to give the freedom. If you like the project, if you think that you can learn out of it, then do it, especially at the beginning. I can only recommend this. So price is not everything. At least you need to make sure that you fill the fridge.
But really, don't try to be underpaid too long because you're going to drag it down for everybody else.
I think my first job was during university in Romania, and I was earning 250 euros a month.
So now you have.
It was called outsourcing. We were outsourcing stuff for IBM. I mean, we were students, right? I could go to exams. No. I mean, it was back then, 2004.
So I guess it's time to close, right? So I would like to give like a big round of applause for our panelists.